This is one of Stan's teaching hives, so credit goes to Stan. When you have a box like this in the wintertime, let's say it's two, take this off. In New Jersey, the recommendation is you have at least 2 deep boxes. Right now, you've come out of summer. New Jersey has a good spring flow. You have a little bit of a dearth in July, August, depending on where you're at. And then you get in right now. The goldenrod looks beautiful out there. The asters look good. You should be seeing storage in your hives. If you're in southern New Jersey, you got to feed. But here's the rule of thumb. We're going to tell you how to get through fall, okay? If you have 2 boxes of bees right now, and you need that many to go through winter, this is how we tell you, and most of our beekeepers are successful in overwintering using this methodology. This goes against the grain that the bees will put it the way they want it, but there's logic behind this, so let me share that with you. And by the way, bees don't live in boxes. We put them there. So do keep that in mind while I educate you on this technique. Take all your bees and look for your brood. Chances are this time of year you have brood in the middle and the bottom, you have brood in the middle and the top box. You have honey and pollen to the outside of both of those boxes. If you're in a tent, you might have empty frame built out. You must have at least 8 frames of drawn out comb in both your boxes this time of year. If you started a new hive, hopefully you fed them all year long and they have built out comb. If you don't have that, you should be feeding because you need cells for the bees to get into because they go in the cell itself in the brood chamber to stay warm. They need that. They cannot survive on foundation. The technique here is you take your brood and you consolidate it in the bottom box in the middle. Brood, 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 brood. 5 frames of brood. Put it in the middle. Next to the brood, or more succinctly, the larvae and the eggs, are fed byproducts of pollen that is processed by the nurse bees. So it stands to reason that they need pollen next to the brood. Outside of it, pollen and honey. They also need honey. Brood is steak and protein. Honey is carbohydrate and energy. They need water, which comes from honey also, and water storage that they have in the mushroom. So if you do this situation where you put your brood in the middle and the bottom of the box, you put pollen to the outside and honey to the outside of that, they're situated for going into the first frost. They have everything that they need. The queen can operate, all the nurse bees are together, they have their food stores within relative vicinity. When it's warm enough, they will move left and right to get these things. Now it becomes cold. They go into somewhat dormant state. They're consuming less stores. But eventually, spring will come and they'll warm up and they'll start to operate again. If it's too cold, they won't. First off, you need enough bees for them to stay warm. Small cluster, think of it like Energizer Bunny. The bees on the outside are holding tight, shoulder to shoulder with their tail ends in that cluster that I told you, they're the crust. The bees in the middle of the stack, between the core and the mantle, they're doing bee aerobics. They've unhinged a flight muscle. There's 3 flight muscles that make a bee's wing operate. They can operate muscles and not use the middle one and it won't flap, okay? They move those muscles and they generate heat. A bee can get 100-something degrees by doing bee aerobics in there. The bee in the middle of the cluster, about a third of the way through, is doing aerobics and generating heat, and everybody's tucked in together, keeping that heat in. They need energy to do that. Like a battery, they only have so much and they're going to fall off and die. Over the course of winter, bees will wear out and they will die. Eventually, if you don't have enough of them, there isn't enough to generate the heat to get them to spring and they die. They could literally make it like right to spring, and if they were that short of the bees, they die. And you say, Dad, you know, I really didn't want that to happen. So you arrange your bees with the brood. Now the nectar flow is on, and or you feed them 2-to-1 syrup. 2-to-1 syrup. You don't feed them 1-to-1. 1-to-1, 1 part water, 1 part sugar is too much moisture right now. It can't evaporate it out in the time that it takes to get to the first frost from September through October. The nights are cool, it's different. 2-to-1. 2 parts sugar, 1 part water. That they can evaporate and they can transform into stores. If you put the brood in the bottom, the second box is where they build the honey. And they build a honey dome over top of the brood. In springtime, when it warms up and they start to move around, bees go up. And they'll come up into that honey dome and move across. When the cluster is big enough, they'll come up and pull the honey and they'll bring it back down. They'll move around there. If you put a thermal camera on a hive in the springtime, when it starts to get warm enough days for them to operate inside, when the sun's hitting the side, they will move around. You'll see them moving around, but they always come back to where the brood is. And you want an excess number of bees so some of them can go out and come back. Okay? So brood in the bottom, and they will store honey across the top. Chris made a great point. What does honey do? It also serves to keep the heat from flowing out. It absorbs the heat, it stays somewhat warm, it liquefies the honey so that they can work. The heat coming up keeps them warm. So they have that honey on the outside, but when it gets cold, they won't use it because heat is coming up from the brood chamber in the bottom, and it's making the food above them viable. It's not popsicle honey, it's warm enough honey because it's keeping warm, okay? So go in your boxes now, while it's still warm enough to operate during the day this weekend. Consolidate your brood in the bottom, put your pollen on the outside, put your honey on the outside. Any excess honey that you find in your hives, stick it right over the center of the brood nest and provide empty frames for them to do it. If you have honey supers and you put them on top and they can fill them 2 right now, 2 deeps, 1 honey super, that's even better. It's not a waste. You don't want to feed bees in the winter. People talk about you put fondant on and things like that. That's emergency feeding. That's not feeding. You don't feed, you don't open. Now, they'll get to a point where you want to feed and it's too cold at night. And the liquid feeders on the top, the troughs that you could really deliver stuff, gets too cold. They won't go get it. It's too cold for them to process and bring back down. If you put an internal feeder inside the hive, just outside, the warmth from the brood chamber will keep that warm enough that they can keep using it. So at some point, when you're chilled going outside, top feeder is out of bounds. No good. Okay? So ventilation. Cold doesn't kill bees. You can keep bees in Canada at 40 below and they do fine. They stay warm. Moisture kills bees. Moisture forms inside the hive. It freezes on the comb. They're toast. So you need to ventilate your hives. You could do what I said, put a quilt box on. You could simply bore a hole in the top of the hive and create a hole. You could put a stick underneath and have it canted. All are good methods. Yeah.
With your quilt box,
Yeah.
would you add ventilation? If so, where would you do it?
Always ventilate from the front of the hive. And what I mean by that is, this is backwards, mind you. Front entrance, front ventilation. Never, I'm sorry, I missed your question.
Okay, with the quilt box, are you doing it under the quilt box? Is that where you're putting your hole?
I put it under the quilt box because I wanted to hit the quilt box and go out. I don't want it to get trapped in the quilt box. The question is, where do you put it when you have a quilt box on? I put an emery shim sometimes there, emery shim like that thing, and it has a hole there for it to get out. Ventilate from the front of the hive. Follow me on this. If you put the ventilation in the front normally and the ventilation in the back, you create a chimney effect. It flows through the hive, and the air escaping in the back creates a draw and sucks all the warmth out. It doesn't happen when it's in the front. So if you're going to ventilate, put a stick underneath. Make sure you put it in the front, not the back. Okay? Front, not the back. Have that wrong. Sorry, it's 2 to 1, not 1 to 1. And wrong. This is important, and it's becoming absolutely prevalent. I'm going to recommend that whenever you can, store your honey and feed it back to the bees. They're finding, well, think about it, feed your kids a nutritious dinner or put a popsicle on their plate. Which would you have, right? Honey, they're finding, is not only full of nutrients and minerals and things from nature that come in with the pollen and all that. There's phytochemicals that are turned on inside the bees that trigger their immune system. That's a late study that just came out in July. And what they're saying is part of this stress for colony collapse disorder is actually caused by the high fructose corn syrup that they're feeding the bees, because they're not getting the phytochemical switch turned on in the gene pool because they're not eating their own honey. Take your honey off, put it in your garage freezer, and feed it back to the bees. They're better off with honey than sugar water. If you have to feed sugar water, 2 to 1, not 1 to 1. 60 to 80 pounds, the Merrick guide. If you're not familiar with Merrick, mid-Atlantic,
Apiary.
something, it's apiculture, I never could remember. But it's old stuff. But the Merrick guides, the fact sheets, are really good. Some of them are a little outmoded, be careful, but the full one is good. And they say 60 to 80 pounds. Here's the deal. You're not on a scale, you don't know. Grab your hive, give it a little bit of tug. Did you get this, or did it go like this? If you get, you got it. I can't describe it any other way. You'll know when you pick it up. Is it got a little something to it, or did it just go up as you went up? You'll know. How much is a frame of honey, a full deep? It's about 10 to 12 pounds. You need 6 or 8 of them in your hive. You also need at least 6 to 8 frames of bees, at minimum. Okay, to have the quantity of bees you need to make the cluster. Question in the back.
Making sugar syrup this time of year, adding cream and tartar to the sucrose, and it
Yeah.
completes the small part of the sucrose molecule into 6-carbon glucose, 6-carbon glucose.
Yeah, the question is, do you add cream of tartar to your solutions? Beekeepers over the eons have come up with things like add cream of tartar, the acidic base in it helps dissolve the sugars. It breaks it down easier for the bees to process. People sometimes take a pinch of salt, they'll take Thymol, they'll put peppermint in, they'll put lemongrass in. There's so many different things that you can add. There's no specific answer to that, but yes. What I would say to you is, be careful in this way. If a pinch is good, a handful is better. No. Go out, find a reputable source. Scientific Beekeeping, Randy Oliver is generally the guy that knows the science, and put him when he tells you, right? Some people, well, no, don't do that. There are certain things, if you eat enough of it, it will toxic, it'll kill you, and it will do harm for the bees. Good question, though. Pinch of salt, though, they do like that. Mouse guards, gotta have them. Should have them already. It's cold. When you do your final inspection, put all your bees in the bottom like we suggested. Before you do that, make sure you pick up and look under the bottom board that you don't have a mouse in there already. They're in now. And incidentally, a little sidebar for me. Every year I have mice in my damn car. Hate it. Go to the health food store, Basil Bandwagon in Flemington, buy yourself a little peppermint oil, Sprinkle it on your air filter in your car. They don't like that. You can sprinkle some on your hive. They don't like peppermint. So you put a pinch of peppermint in your feed, and it gets in the hive, and the odor of the bees and whatever, it smells really nice. Just a drop, though. Remember what I said. Put your mouse guards on. Don't go without it, really. Bad idea. Strap them down. These are my hives. I put a strap on them. Just a simple thing. Bears this time of year. It is bear time. They're getting ready for going in their dens. They're out. If you don't have a bear fence, at minimum, you could try and say, I did something about it by strapping your hives. They might knock it over, but they may not get in it. This hive right here got knocked over by a deer running against it during this time. That's why the straps are on it. Sharon came out, found the thing upside down, put it back together. They survived the winter. So strap your hives, please. It's simple. They cost a couple bucks per whip. And we do have hurricanes here, remember, Sandy? My hives look just like that, and they went perfectly fine.
That's not in the summer, right?
No, that's January.
No, but I mean, you don't leave them strapped in the summer.
I leave them strapped all year long.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah,
I close mine up, I strap them down.
all year long.
Straps.
And you know, I got the quilt box on them. And these are my hive stands that I put them on a little platform, so I don't have to bend all the way down to get to the bottom boxes. They're made of PVC. Better yet, fence them. This is Dave's yard. He's got a bear fence all the way around. Bait your bear fence. You
Bacon.
want the bear to get a nose on that wire and get a snout full so that they don't come back. You put it out and don't bait it, you might as well leave it off. Okay? This is a really good idea because, as the slide said, it's not a matter of when, it's a matter, or if, it's a matter of when. It will happen. And there are a number of people sitting in the room, as Roger said, that have visits. Your punch list. Swap out your bottom boards, if that's your thing. You're running screens, slide the insert in. There are beekeepers who successfully don't bother. Not a problem. Never put it in, never slid it in. There are other people who think the R value of, now mind you, your ventilation, we created a problem, but if you don't ventilate or the ventilation isn't that bad, it's only going to go up to the top and it gets trapped. So it's not going to go out that screen. Just kind of keep that in mind. But if you swap it out for a solid bottom board this time of year, you get the R value of it and there is no air movement. Okay? Some people leave them on, screen bottom boards, because they want the ventilation from them. Quilter insulation box. Have your hives tilted. They all should be. You want them tilted just enough so that if the water runs in and you have a solid bottom about it, it's not gathering against the back and freezing. And you don't want ice on that bottom board, because as they come down and go out, you're going to have your issues. Okay? So tilt your hives to the front entrance, please, not the back. Tar paper wraps, wind blocks. They're a bit excessive in New Jersey. You don't necessarily need them, but some people feel better, and they do this. Just go get some tar paper, wrap it around, a couple staples, good to go. In those, you will see during winter that the bees will fly, and the tar paper in the morning when the sun hits it tends to warm the hive up a little bit, and they'll go out and do their cleansing flights. So you could do that. Inevitably, Tim Schuler, our state apiarist, talks about people who pick a location because it's in a beautiful spot on the property, but it's the first place to get snow and pile, and it's the last place to melt. If your hives are there, it is time to move them. So look at what you have. And by the way, now is the time too. You know, there's this whole thing about during the season, you move them 2 feet or 2 miles to get them to a different location on your property. When they're all on the cluster and they're in, just put a guard across the front, pick the hive up, put it wherever you want. When they get out in the spring, they'll figure it out. now's the time to move them. If you have them in a bad location on your property, think about what you're planning for next year. Inevitably, this time of year, people are faced with weed colonies. I had one. Combine them. Take a single piece of newspaper and set it on top of the strong hive. Put a couple slits in it. You could spray it with sugar water, spray the bees with sugar water, both sides, so they're preoccupied with grooming and they smell the same. And you take the weed colony and you put it on top and you cover them off and leave them be. They will eventually chew through the paper and get through. On your weed colony, you either pinch your queen or you leave it, and it's hopefully the strong one will win, right? People don't like to pinch queens, but she's not producing anyway. So your best logic is to pinch her off, combine the colonies. A weed colony and a so-so colony are both going to be dead in the spring. You're better off combining the bees and let them join their forces. Now's the time to do that, while they have time to acclimate and move the season. You know, one thing that's not on the slide is about mites. Hopefully July and August, you treat it for your mites. It's not too late. And there is some movement. How many, raise your hand if your bees were active last week? Yeah, everybody in the room. So if your neighbor didn't treat and there is movement of bees, you could potentially start to see some mite problems. So one thing Bob and I were talking about on the ride here, if you hold your frame up and they're skittering all over the place, I've learned recently that that might indicate a varroa infestation. That's interesting. If you've ever seen that, test for varroa, let me know. Last thing, put your weight on top, because you don't want your thing to fly off in the middle of winter. That's just death to the bees. I want to again thank Chris and Annie for coming out and showing us. We're going to turn the lights on. We encourage you to come up and look at the equipment. One thing, Roger brought a national standard hive style bottom board that fits a Langstrom. And the interesting thing about it, it has an entrance that you come in from the bottom, but you have to go up and in. And it does not allow for robbing bees to do that mad dash in and get past the guards. So it's a really interesting design.
Mouse guard proof too.
And it's mouse guard built in. So come and take a look at that. That's over here. You can look at the A-frame equipment, the medium, and you can ask questions. Thank you, everybody, for coming out.